I say three important things stand out in the lessons for today. First, God uses the small and the insignificant people, the small and insignificant places, to do his most important work. Then in Mary's song, secondly, we hear that he prefers lowliness instead of the high and the mighty. And thirdly, he prefers some indication from his servants that they appreciate the role they've been given. The last part's probably the most important part. So, in the ways of God, small turns out to be big. The lowly seem to get God's attention. And some delight in the role of servant is required for the followers of Jesus. So for God, small turns out to be big. Bethlehem was a small, out-of-the-way place. Around here, it would be a little bit like Frederick. You got to get off I-75 and go 2 miles west to get there. In our day, his choice to come into the world would not be London or New York or Boston. He would come into the world through a place like Frederick. When he makes his appearance, he chooses not the big places, not through the important people, but he picks small places, small towns, and ordinary people to do his work. That is the theme of all three lessons for today. To those who feel small in compared to our highly paid athletes, to those who feel small compared to our billionaires and movie stars, to those who seem small to the ones who seem to run just about everything, God uses the insignificant, and to us, that is good news. I have used this touching scene before, but it is so good as an illustration of how God works. Every year, Luther Seminary puts on a seminar for pastors out at a ski lodge in Colorado, where you hear a lecture in the morning, a lecture in the evening, and ski all day. Pastor Gable and I attended that week-long seminar for 20 years straight. There we met several outstanding professors who taught us about life, and they taught us about the Bible. Dr. Gerhard Ferde was an Old Testament professor. Dr. Sheldon Toskengard was the professor of homiletics, that's what they call preaching. And Dr. James Nestigen was a professor of New Testament. After Ferde and Toskengard retired, Nestigen continued to meet with those two for breakfast every Tuesday morning. Dr. Ferde became afflicted with Parkinson's disease, and his hands shook uncontrollably. Dr. Toskengard had the beginning stages of Alzheimer's disease and couldn't remember anything. So there they were, these three superheroes of ours, having breakfast on a Tuesday morning. Sheldon holding Gerhard Ferde's arm to steady it while he put his food in his mouth, and Ferdy finishing Toskengard's sentences because Toskengard could not remember what he started saying. A seemingly insignificant picture in a small, out-of-the-way restaurant in Minneapolis. Without fanfare, off to the side, in a place no one would expect. This touching display of ordinary people doing some extraordinary things are exactly the places that we can still find to kneel. Small, insignificant people and places is where God does his best work. Others have captured this idea in writing songs like The Little Drummer Boy. It wasn't the big, handsome, strong, rich drummer boy. It was the little drummer boy. Or those who wrote the song about the story about the tiniest angel. It wasn't the most glamorous angel. It wasn't the most beautiful angel. It wasn't the angel of high status in whatever there are among the cherubim. It was the tiniest angel. Bethlehem was chosen because of its ordinariness, its lack of luster, its off to the side, a place that no one would expect. And that's the place God comes. And that's the place he still comes. Old little town of Bethlehem, _little. Secondly, the lowly seem to get God's attention. I heard a line you may not like, but I do. Never be haughty to the humble, but never be humble to the haughty. Haughty is a word, as you heard on one of the Wednesday nights, that I really like. Never liked the behavior. The word haughty means arrogant and pretentious. It means pompous and snobbish. Hoity-toity, having a superior attitude. What gets God's attention is the exact opposite of all of that. Everything that we hear in Mary's song tells us that the word lowly describes her well. Lowly of background, lowly of experience, lowly of attitude. She was not royalty. She had not been to finishing school. She was not related to an important citizen. We know nothing about her parents except they were from Nazareth. Mary is the epitome of lowly. A regular, normal girl from a little town with no experience in parenting. God chooses her to bear his child. Her lack of credentials says more about God, I think, than it does about Mary. Maybe God finds it easier to work with those whose main credential is faith and nothing else. A woman who I had helped before came to my office downstate just before Christmas. I filled her bag with food. She asked me if I would give her communion, which I did. And then she told me that her grandkids weren't about to have a very pleasant Christmas because their family was out of money. Now, as pastor of that church, I had several Barbara Nelsons who would put fistfuls of money in my hand for my discretionary fund, which was meant for people I saw fit to help. Or other projects that I was involved in. I always had this bunch of money to use in ways I thought God would want me to use it. So I said, how many grandkids? 5. So I went in my bag of Barbara Nelson kind of money, and I took out 5 $20 bills, and I handed them to her. And I said, buy some presents for your grandkids, and tell them you got this from, you got the presents from Jesus. I saw her as another lowly woman getting to participate in another one of God's miracles. To God, lowly seems to work best. Finally, and I said, perhaps this is the most important part of the sermon. Some delight in the role of servant is required for the followers of Jesus. I said, some delight in the role of servant. Now, all ministers do not perform their roles the same way. I learned from my pastor, Leon Oppel, never to charge a fee for anything that I did in my role as pastor. And I never did. He said, you're not a hireling, you're a servant. So, ordained now 47 years, I never had a fee for weddings or funerals or baptisms or house blessings, which I was sometimes called to do by the Filipinos who had come to this country and wanted their house blessed. Anything that I did, I never charged a fee. Now, some of my hoity-toity colleagues, however, did. And we would often get into discussions about that. Some said to me they were always so busy they didn't have time to do things for nothing. To which I would reply, I didn't say people never gave me anything for a service I provided. I just said I never had a fee. Well, some would say, what if they don't give you anything? My answer was, that would remind me who I work for. The role of a servant can be a tough job. Physically hard, emotionally draining. Sometimes in the role of the servant there's nothing but grief. But with the right attitude, with some finesse, I think I was given finesse by somebody. And the ability to overlook a lot, it also puts you in touch with the most important parts of life. Servant is the job description of every person who understands the gospel. And Mary is honored and venerated because from the moment her assignment began, Mary delighted in it. Here's what she said. My spirit rejoices. My soul magnifies the Lord. God has shown his favor to me. To delight in the role of serving, willing to do whatever it takes, is the example that Mary gives us. She was ready, willing, and able to be interrupted, to have the direction of her life changed, to participate with God in redeeming the world. Mary's story is truly amazing because of what she did and that she did it with such delight. Here's the sermon. Small in the eyes of God is big. Lowly gets God's attention. And what's required for the servant of God is to delight in that